A lonely billionaire disguises himself as a homeless man to discover whether true love still exists, only to meet a poor teacher whose kindness changes his life forever. I need your support. Please subscribe moo/y channel. The city lights glittered like diamonds across the night sky, reflecting against the tall glass walls of the Johnson mansion. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Security guards stood alert at every corner. Inside the grand dining hall, expensive chandeliers glowed softly above a table filled with untouched food. Everything around Obina Johnson screamed wealth. He was one of the youngest billionaires in the country. CEO of Johnson Global Industries. Famous. Powerful. Admired. Whenever he walked into a room, people stood up immediately. Investors praised him. Newspapers called him a genius. Women smiled at him before he even spoke. But none of it touched the emptiness inside his heart. That night, Obina sat alone in his massive living room, staring silently at the city through the glass windows. His phone buzzed non-stop beside him. "Sir, tomorrow's investors' meeting has been confirmed. Your father called twice. Your interview with the business channel is trending online." He slowly muted the phone and closed his eyes. The mansion was beautiful, but painfully quiet. There were over 20 rooms in the house, yet most of them had never truly been lived in. No laughter. No warmth. No real love. Only silence. Does anyone actually love me, or do they only love my money? The thought haunted him every night. Obina had dated models, influencers, actresses, and successful women from wealthy families. They all seemed perfect in the beginning. They smiled at his jokes, admired his gifts, and posted glamorous photos beside him. But deep down, he always felt something missing. Everything felt rehearsed. Then came Amaka. She was different, or at least that was what he believed. She spoke softly, listened carefully, and made him feel understood. For the first time in years, Obina allowed himself to dream about marriage and a future filled with peace. He bought her a beautiful diamond ring. Wedding preparations had already begun. But sometimes the people we trust the most hide the deepest betrayal. One morning, Obina arrived at his office earlier than usual. The building was still quiet. As he walked toward his private office, he heard laughter from inside the conference room. He paused, then slowly pushed the door open. And his entire world shattered. Amaka stood there, in the arms of his chief financial officer. The same man Obina trusted like family. Amaka looked shocked when she saw him standing there. The CFO immediately stepped back nervously. "Obina, wait, it's not what you think." But he didn't say a word. The silence in his eyes was more painful than anger. He simply turned around and walked away. That same day, he canceled the wedding. He fired the CFO immediately and locked himself inside his mansion for days. No meetings. No interviews. No visitors. The world thought the billionaire had traveled abroad. But the truth was far more painful. He stayed home alone, questioning everything. Was he not enough? Would anyone ever choose him if he had nothing? Outside, people still admired the powerful billionaire named Obina Johnson. But inside, he was just a broken man searching for something money could never buy. Because sometimes, the loneliest people are the ones surrounded by everything. The rain poured heavily outside the mansion windows as Obina stood silently in front of the mirror. His expensive suit hung perfectly on his body, his luxury watch sparkled under the soft light, and yet, he felt nothing. Slowly, he removed the watch and placed it on the table. Then the jacket. Then the polished shoes. For the first time in years, Obina Johnson looked at himself without the armor of wealth. "Get me old clothes," he told his assistant, Ngozi, over the phone. Torn shirts. Worn slippers. No designer brands. There was silence on the line. "Sir, are you serious?" "Yes." The next morning, before sunrise, the billionaire disappeared. No bodyguards. No luxury cars. No headlines. He rented a tiny room in a poor part of the city where the walls were cracked and the fan barely worked. The mattress smelled old. The bathroom leaked constantly. But Obina never complained. This was the life he wanted to understand. He stopped shaving. His beard grew rough and uneven. He wore faded shirts and dusty jeans with holes at the knees. During the day, He worked small jobs at markets and roadside shops. Sometimes he carried heavy bags for traders. Sometimes he washed cars under the burning sun. At night, he returned to his tiny room exhausted, folding the little cash he earned into his pocket. And strangely, he felt more human than he had in years. Nobody bowed when he entered a room anymore. Nobody cared about his opinions. He had become invisible. But Obina was not finished. He wanted answers. Ngozi secretly arranged simple blind dates for him with different women. Each woman was told the same story. He used to have a better life, she explained. But things became difficult. He's trying to survive and rebuild himself. The first date happened at a cheap roadside restaurant. Plastic chairs. Loud traffic. The smell of grilled meat in the air. Obina arrived early wearing an old faded shirt and dusty sandals. He kept his head low, waiting quietly. Then the woman arrived. She was beautiful, fashionable, and clearly uncomfortable the moment she saw him. Her eyes moved slowly over his clothes before she frowned. "You're Obina." "Yes," he answered politely. She looked around in disbelief. "You brought me here?" "I thought it was peaceful." She laughed softly, but there was cruelty in it. "You should at least try to look decent. Honestly, you look homeless." Those words landed like stones inside his chest. She left before the food even arrived. Obina sat there alone, staring silently at the untouched plates. A few days later came another woman. This one acted kinder at first. She smiled often and asked many questions. But not about his dreams. Not about his heart. Only about money. "How much do you earn? Do you have savings? What exactly do you own?" Every question felt like an interview instead of a conversation. Then came the third woman. For one brief moment, Obina thought she might be different. She spoke gently, held his hand, and told him she admired hard-working men. Hope quietly entered his heart again. But the very next morning, she sent him a message. "Can you help me pay my rent? I'm struggling badly." Obina stared at the phone for a long time. Not even 24 hours had passed. Maybe real love only exists in dreams. That night, he sat outside his small apartment under the dim streetlight, listening to distant traffic and barking dogs. Could anyone truly love a man who seemed to have nothing? For the first time in his life, Obina began losing faith not in money, but in people. Because the world often treats poor hearts as if they are worthless. The evening sky turned dark long before night arrived. Heavy clouds swallowed the last bit of sunlight, and within minutes, rain crashed down across the city streets. People ran for cover. Shop owners hurried to pull in their goods. Taxi drivers shouted over the storm. The cold wind carried the smell of wet dust and smoke through the crowded roadside market. Under a leaking zinc shelter near an old sewing shop, Obina sat quietly with his arms folded tightly against his chest. His faded hoodie was soaked. Water dripped from his beard onto the ground beneath him. He had not eaten all day. People passed by without looking at him twice. Some avoided him completely. Others stared with disgust before walking away. Obina lowered his eyes, already used to being invisible. Maybe kindness truly no longer exists. Thunder shook the sky. Then suddenly, a soft voice interrupted the storm. "Sir, you're getting wet." Obina slowly looked up. A young woman stood in front of him holding a small umbrella. Raindrops slid down the edges as the wind pushed against her scarf. She wore simple black trousers, plastic slippers, and a lilac blouse slightly damp from the rain. But her eyes were warm. Not fearful. Not judgmental. Just kind. For a moment, Obina said nothing. The woman gently opened the nylon bag in her hand and brought out a small food container wrapped carefully in cloth. "It's just rice and beans," she said softly. "I made it for myself after work, but you look hungry." Obina stared at the container in disbelief. Nobody had offered him real kindness in weeks. Not cameras. Not fake sympathy. Real kindness. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. The woman looked confused by the question. "Because you need help." Such simple words. Yet they touched something broken deep inside him. She handed him the food with both hands, then removed the dry wrapper from around her shoulders and placed it gently over him. You'll get sick sitting in this rain. Obina swallowed hard as warmth slowly spread through his chest. Not because of the food. Not because of the cloth. Because for the first time in a very long time, someone saw him as human. My name is Chidinma, she said with a small smile. I teach at a nursery school nearby. And after school, I sew clothes here. Obina, he answered quietly. She nodded kindly. Nice to meet you, Obina. The rain grew heavier, beating loudly against the rooftops around them. Chidinma glanced toward her tiny sewing shop beside the road. If you want, she said gently, you can stay inside the shop until the rain stops. It's warmer there. Obina looked at her carefully. There was no greed in her eyes.
No hidden intention. No pity.
Just pure human compassion. And somehow, that frightened him more than cruelty ever had. Because hope can be dangerous to a wounded heart. Inside the tiny shop, a single bulb glowed softly above old sewing machines and folded fabrics stacked neatly against the wall. Chidinma boiled water for tea while Obina sat quietly on a small stool, listening to the peaceful sound of rain hitting the roof. You don't ask many questions, he said after a while. She smiled faintly. Sometimes people don't need questions. Sometimes they just need kindness. Obina lowered his eyes, hiding the emotion rising inside him. Could one small act of kindness really change a life? That night, while the storm continued outside, something inside Obina Johnson slowly began to heal. Because the people with the purest hearts are often the ones who have the least to give, yet still choose to give anyway. The village was alive with music, laughter, and the smell of freshly cooked food. Colorful plastic chairs filled the family compound, while children ran across the dusty yard chasing balloons. It was Chidinma's mother's birthday celebration. Women danced near large pots of rice and soup, while older men sat under a canopy discussing politics and business. The entire family had gathered for the occasion. And beside Chidinma stood Obina. He wore a simple button-up shirt, dark trousers, and old shoes polished carefully by hand. His beard was trimmed neatly now, but he still looked like an ordinary struggling man. Yet Chidinma held his hand proudly. This is my fiancée, Obina, she said with a warm smile. For a brief second, silence spread across the gathering. Then came the judgmental stares. Her older sister, Ifeoma, looked him up and down slowly before forcing out a fake smile. This is the man you want to marry? She asked coldly. Chidinma nodded confidently. Yes. Ifeoma folded her arms. You were always the smartest girl in school. I expected better. The words hung painfully in the air. Obina simply smiled politely and lowered his eyes. He had grown used to humiliation. Later that evening, the insults became worse. At the dinner table, Chidinma's relatives whispered loudly enough for him to hear. What exactly does he do? Does he even own a car? He looks like he can barely feed himself. Then Chidinma's ex-boyfriend arrived. Uche. Tall, loud, and dressed in expensive designer clothes with a Johnson Group logo proudly stitched on his shirt. He walked into the compound like he owned the place. The moment he saw Obina, a mocking smile spread across his face. So this is the man Chidinma left me for, he laughed loudly. You moved from luxury to suffering. A few people chuckled nervously. Obina stayed calm. But Chidinma immediately spoke up. At least he respects me, she said firmly. Something you never learned. Uche's smile faded slightly. Still, the humiliation continued throughout the night. Even Chidinma's mother looked disappointed. How do you plan to take care of my daughter? She asked directly. You have no business, no house, no status. Obina looked down quietly. So this is how the world measures a man. But before he could answer, Chidinma gently reached for his hand under the table. That one small gesture gave him strength. The next morning, the family gathered outside for breakfast. Birds chirped softly in the trees while conversations floated through the compound. Then suddenly, the sound of powerful engines filled the air. Everyone turned. 3 black luxury SUVs slowly drove through the compound gates, followed by 2 sleek sedans shining under the morning sun. The entire yard went silent. The first SUV stopped. A man in a black suit stepped out and opened the rear door respectfully. Ngozi emerged calmly from the vehicle, dressed elegantly in corporate black. Gasps spread through the crowd. She walked directly toward Obina. "Sir," she said respectfully, "everything is ready." The silence became heavy. Confused whispers erupted immediately. "Sir. Who is this man? What's happening?" Obina slowly stood to his feet. Then for the first time, his posture changed. No longer small. No longer invisible. The quiet confidence of a powerful man returned instantly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded file containing company documents and business papers. "My name," he said calmly, "is Obina Johnson." Several people froze. "I am the CEO of Johnson Group." The entire compound exploded into shocked murmurs. Phones appeared instantly. People searched his name online with trembling hands. Photos filled their screens. Business conferences. Magazine covers. Meetings with presidents. Luxury towers carrying the Johnson name. Uche's face turned completely pale. The same man he mocked yesterday was the owner of the company where he worked as a mere supervisor. Ifeoma nearly dropped her drink. Even Chidinma's mother covered her mouth in disbelief. But Obina's eyes searched for only one person. Chidinma. Tears filled her eyes as she stared at him silently. "You knew who I was," he said softly, stepping closer to her. "But you treated me with kindness before any of this mattered." Then slowly, in front of everyone, he knelt down and revealed a small velvet ring box. "Will you marry me, for real this time?" Chidinma broke into tears and nodded immediately. "Yes." And while the crowd stood frozen in shame and shock, Obina realized something important. The people who truly matter will respect you before they know your worth. The evening sky glowed with golden lights as hundreds of guests gathered inside the luxurious ballroom of Johnson Group's annual charity gala. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above expensive silk dresses and black designer suits. Cameras flashed endlessly as celebrities, politicians, and wealthy business owners laughed together under the sound of soft violin music. At the center of it all stood Obina Johnson. Tall, calm, powerful, the billionaire every magazine in the country admired. But tonight, his eyes searched for only one person. Chidinma. The woman who had loved him when he looked like nothing. The woman who gave food to a stranger during the rain. The woman who healed a heart money could never fix. Obina stepped onto the grand stage as reporters rushed closer. His voice echoed through the hall while millions watched the live broadcast online. "I spent years surrounded by wealth," he said softly. "But the happiest moment of my life happened when someone showed kindness to a poor man sitting in the rain." The crowd fell silent. Then Obina turned toward Chidinma. She stood near the back of the ballroom, wearing a simple elegant dress, her eyes already filled with tears. Slowly, Obina walked toward her. Every camera followed. Every whisper stopped. And before the entire country, the billionaire knelt down on one knee. Gasps filled the room instantly. "Chidinma," he said emotionally, holding a diamond ring in trembling hands, "you loved me before you knew my name, my money, or my power. Will you marry me and stay beside me forever?" Tears rolled down Chidinma's cheeks as the guests erupted into applause. For one beautiful moment, it felt like the world had finally given them peace. But peace never stays for long. Suddenly, the ballroom doors opened. Obina's parents entered. The atmosphere changed immediately. His father's cold face carried authority. His mother's sharp eyes landed directly on Chidinma with visible disappointment. The music stopped. Silence spread across the hall. Obina slowly stood up. His mother walked closer, forcing a polite smile for the cameras before speaking quietly. "You cannot marry this woman." The words struck Chidinma like a knife. Obina frowned. "Mother." "She is not from our world," his father interrupted firmly. "A poor village teacher cannot become part of the Johnson family." The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Chidinma lowered her eyes as humiliation burned inside her chest. Obina stepped protectively beside her. "I love her." "But love is not enough," his father replied coldly. "Marriage is about status, power, and reputation." How could people with everything still understand so little? Chidinma's hands trembled slightly. For the first time since meeting Obina, fear entered her heart. That night, after the guests left and the lights faded, Chidinma sat alone inside her tiny apartment. Rain tapped softly against the window while she held a pregnancy test in shaking hands. Positive. Her breathing became uneven. A child. Obina's child. Tears filled her eyes again, but this time they carried fear instead of happiness. If I stay, his family will destroy his peace forever. Days passed quietly. Obina searched everywhere for her after she suddenly disappeared. He visited her sewing shop. Empty. He called her phone. Switched off. He sent people across the city searching desperately while sleepless nights slowly consumed him. For the first time in years, the billionaire who once owned everything felt powerless again. Meanwhile, far away in a small rural town, Chidinma lived quietly under a different name. She taught children during the day and silently cried at night while carrying Obina's unborn baby. Every heartbeat reminded her of the man she still loved deeply. But she believed leaving him was the greatest sacrifice she could make. Sometimes, love hurts most when it tries to protect someone else. And in the end, true love is not measured by wealth, but by what a person is willing to sacrifice for another heart. The morning sun rose gently over the quiet rural town as children laughed outside the small school building where Chidinma now worked. Inside the classroom, she stood near the window, softly teaching while one hand rested protectively over her growing stomach. Her face carried peace, but her eyes still carried sadness. Every night, she thought about Obina. Every night, she wondered if leaving him had truly been the right choice. Then suddenly, a black luxury SUV stopped outside the school. The children rushed toward the windows excitedly. Chidinma froze instantly. Her heartbeat became uneven. Slowly, the car door opened. And there he was. Obina. Standing beneath the sunlight in a simple black suit, his eyes filled with emotion after months of searching. For a moment, neither of them moved. The world around them seemed to disappear completely. Then Obina walked toward her. "You disappeared without a word," he whispered painfully. "Do you know what that did to me?" Tears filled Chidinma's eyes immediately. "I was trying to protect you," she replied softly. "Your family would never accept someone like me." Obina shook his head firmly. "I don't care about money anymore. I don't care about status. I searched everywhere because my life means nothing without you." His voice cracked slightly as his eyes slowly lowered toward her stomach. The truth hit him instantly. He looked back at her with trembling emotion. "Our baby." Chidinma nodded silently. Obina covered his face for a second as tears finally escaped his eyes. A billionaire surrounded by power, crying like a broken man in front of the woman he loved. Could love really survive pain, distance, and fear? Then gently, Obina knelt in front of her stomach and whispered emotionally, "I promise I will spend the rest of my life protecting both of you. This is where my heart truly belongs." Days later, Obina brought Chidinma back home. But this time, something had changed inside his parents. His mother quietly watched Chidinma helping one of the houseworkers carry heavy bags despite being pregnant herself. She saw the kindness in her heart. She saw the humility no amount of money could buy. Later that evening, Obina's father sat silently beside Chidinma in the garden. "For years," he admitted quietly, "I believed wealth made people valuable." His eyes softened with regret. "But you gave my son something money never could, peace." Chidinma's eyes filled with tears as his mother gently held her hands for the first time. "Please forgive us." Months later, their wedding became one of the most beautiful celebrations the city had ever seen. White flowers covered the grand church. Soft piano music filled the air. But unlike other billionaire weddings filled only with rich guests and cameras, this wedding welcomed everyone. Poor families, workers, teachers, street children. Even homeless strangers were invited to eat and celebrate. Because Obina never forgot the pain of being treated like nothing. And Chidinma never forgot the importance of kindness. As they stood together holding their newborn baby after the ceremony, Obina smiled peacefully for the first time in years. Not because of wealth. Not because of fame. But because someone had loved him when he looked completely worthless. And together, they used their fortune to build schools, shelters, and free hospitals for people in need. Their love story became proof that kindness can heal even the most broken heart. Because in the end, the richest soul is the one that still knows how to love others with sincerity.